Hello and welcome to another excelattheoffice.com video. My name's Adrian and here I'm going to show you the final and best part of the functionality of a dashboard, where I'm going to show you how to insert and edit the format of slices. So slices, it's not a very nice name particularly, but what in Excel slices do is allow you to slice and dice the data. So for example, if I choose my office location of UK, that filters all my nicely presented dashboard according to just the UK element. So you'll go from what we've done in the videos so far is I've shown you how to get your data structured in an order so you can analyze the data easier. We've done what the next level in terms of creating the various pivot tables in video 3 about how you can slice and dice the data in pivots. Often people stop there, but then in previous videos I've shown you how to get your dashboard space ready and then present that nicely through charts and graphs, and that will certainly impress your bosses. But using slicers is what will get your bosses saying, hang on, you can't get promoted, we can't lose you to another company, name your price, because we want to keep you and keep your genius in this function for our organization. So let's get to slices. The steps I'm going to go through here in terms of our creating and linking up the slicers. First of all, we're going to note down the pivots that you want to use. That's quite a handy tip to just get organized. If you're using my follow along HR people dashboard, which you'll find at excelattheoffice.com/blog, then you'll want to use these slicers if you want to use the same as I'm doing. Then what we're going to do, I'm going to show you how to insert your first slicer, how to then format it in a slicer style, then apply that format to all the slicers you've insert, put them in the dashboard, connect them to the data, that's the important technical bit, and then make sure that they can't be messed around with by your users and test them out, obviously. So I'm going to go to my follow along. So in the follow along you will have got to something like this from the previous videos. So it all looks very nice, but it's not an interactive dashboard, it's just a static dashboard, if you like, at the moment. So let's create the first slicer. And this is easier than you think. You might have never encountered slicers before, but it's a really handy way of manipulating counts within pivot tables of your data. So the pivot table summarizes the data for you, so you haven't got to use these filters to count various facets, and the slicers then allow you to manipulate that pivot table without having to adjust all the pivot table itself. So the simple way of doing it, you select a pivot table. We're going to go to Insert. Across to the right here is Slicer. So you can insert all your slicers in one go. The slicers I want to select are office location, full or part-time category, CPD up to date, department, sex, ethnicity, the age group, I want the seniority, service category, broad function, and PDR rating. So this will allow me to slice and dice the data according to where people are, some demographic data, what their role is, how well they're performing, how senior they are, in what function and department they reside, how long they've been with the organization, and whether or not they're full or part-time. So that places the slicers all in a kind of a long list. I mean, if you've got a pivot table and loads of data fields, what you'll notice, all these slicers are pointing at that pivot table. So when I select USA and males and white, so this is you can see how this can be quite a powerful way of slicing and dicing the data in your pivot tables without having to use all the various different filters and drop down menus that you can have on your pivot table. So for example, I know that there's 18 white males working in the office location of the US. And you can clear the selections of a slicer just by pressing that unfilter. Now that's pretty nice, but what you might notice is when I right click and cut this and bring it to my dashboard area for office location, it looks okay, but I want to get it in keeping with my theme. The way to do that, I want to create a slightly different slicer format, and as usual with Excel, I mean, here's a format I've made earlier, but Excel drop downs, it's very much like the table styles. You can choose different styles, ready-made styles, but it's a very limited set of styles, and they're not particularly ideal. So what I'm going to do is create a new slicer style that's more in keeping with my teal and dark teal color scheme. So to create our own slicer style, we'll use this drop down and create new slicer style. So I'm going to call this Dunder style, a bit like Gangnam style but less funky. Under the whole slicer, so you can choose what the whole slicer looks like, the header area, selected items with data or no data, what the unselected items look like, and hovered. So I'm going to focus more on the whole slicer headed, what selected looked like, and the hovered, so that you can see it's kind of giving some interaction to the user. So the whole slicer, my fill color is going to be this light grey. My border, I'm going to select a thick pen and color of dark teal before I apply my border, otherwise it won't work. I'm going to give it a border outline, nice thick outline border. My font, I'm going to choose Arial. I'm going to make it bold. I'm not going to define the color of it just yet, because that will come a bit later when I do the individual items. I'm going to choose 12 for now and click OK. The header, I'm going to format this so that it's already going to be Arial because of the whole slicer, but the color of my header, I want that dark teal font. Click OK on that. Selected item with data, I'm going to format this so that my font is already Arial again, sorry, but the color I want it white. So the font I want white, but the fill I'm going to have my dark teal, and it's not here, so I need to go to my more colors. What you can do is use your color scheme hex and copy and paste it in here as I showed you at the set out. I'm just for speed just going to do it roughly right from here. Click OK and OK that. Selected item with no data, so I'm going to go for a lighter teal color just to show that it is kind of empty. So if I go to more colors, something like there, and the font again I want as white. Click OK. I'm not interested in the unselected items with data or no data, they can stay the same. Hovered items with data, I'm going to format that so that the fill of those items is gold, so it kind of hovers over it to kind of really show, oh, do you want to select this? Click OK. But when there's no data, I'm going to format that as a slightly lighter gold, so the fill is slightly lighter gold. And you're starting to get a preview of your slicer settings here. And you can choose, if you select this box, that sets this style as the default style for this document. Click OK, and now that doesn't apply it to the slicer, but what you can do instead of this old style is select your slicer and then choose this Dunder style. I mean, I've already created one earlier, Dunder slicer I called that, but let's click Dunder style, and there we go. And if I hover over it, see how that's quite bold and interactive. So now you can go to your pivots area, select all the slicers you've just put in, holding down Shift or Control, to select all the slicers, being careful not to select something within that slicer. And under my slicer tab, I'm going to, instead of that boring old default blue style, I'm going to choose the style I've just created. So all of them now refer to that style. Now I'm going to Control X to cut them, bring them all into my dashboard area. Now, one thing you might do is paste them a bit higher up because they start to get lost, because these, remember we hid all these other million rows of Excel, so that means that space below, nothing exists within it, so it automatically resizes them to where stuff exists, i.e. shrinks them. So I'm going to just paste them up here for now, so it keeps their full size. And I want to position and resize these first. And to do that, I'm going to hold down Alt as I do it to keep them within the bounds of my outlines. If I highlight cells, you'll see that they align nicely to those borders. So I want location here. That's going to be about the width to J. You can, if you wish, under the slicer settings, give them a unique caption under here. So under slicer caption, instead of office location, I can abbreviate that name if I want. So I'm going to take out office and just call it location. Or if you want to make it look more title-like, you can type out in capitals location. Up to you, really. Underneath that, I want my full or part-time category, which is over here. So I'm just going to select around the title, hold down Alt, so it puts it roughly aligned to the cells, and then make that the size I want. Next is whether or not the CPD is up to date. I'm going to bring that down, make it a bit smaller so I can position it, get it in roughly the right place. And for consistency, I just want it the same size as those slicers above. So that's looking good. Now, department, there's quite a lot of choices here. So if I another quicker way, Control X, find my cell that I want to position it in, Control V to paste it. So when you've got a lot of choices, don't have your users scrolling if you can help it. Use the full space available to you. So I'm going to Alt and hold to drag that down. So now people can choose different departments. And here's where the executive are all based at the USA. So where there's no data, this is what I was talking about earlier, where the difference between where there's data and it's selectable, that's a dark teal with a gold highlight. Where there's no data for the particular selection, it's a lighter teal with a kind of yellowy highlight, because all the executive are in the USA, so if you were to select the UK, you'll get no results. And these are only linked to that initial pivot for now. They're not linked up to all the other pivots, but I'll show you how to do that in a bit. So if I just remove, this is unfilter things, clear filter, and what you might want to do is set up your slicers so that the users can select multiple things. So if you choose this as a default before you save it, then that allows multiple selections rather than selecting one thing at a time. People can play about with that, so as it happens, this is switching things off so that these are now the selected items. But obviously a quicker way, if you just want to select a couple of things, is clear the filter, select one of the couple of things that you want, then the multi-filter, and then add the other things to it. So I'm just going to clear that for now. My next set of slicers, I want my demographics, so the simple ones first, so sex, male, female, ethnic group. If I Control X that one, save having to drag it down, and Control V here for ethnicity, and then my age group, Control X and Control V here. So my age group, now these don't quite fit, but what I can do, here's a little trick. You can edit that so that they have multiple columns to save on space. So what you can do is right click your slicer, go to the size and properties. Under position and layout. This number of columns, rather than 1, you can choose 2, and there we go. That saves space. I can now bring that slicer up so it's not taking up hardly as much space. Similarly with this one, I've still got my format slicer properties on the right, so I'm going to do 2 columns with that. Bring it up. So now my age groups will fit nicely here. I could even do 2 columns for that should I wish, so that I can line it up with that next one below. So that's a handy little tip, putting your slicers in multiple columns using the position and layout settings. One thing I'd also recommend you do with all your slicers, and I've done on my demo dashboard, is under the position and layout, check this box, disable resizing and moving, so that your users can't, when they're selecting different things, can't accidentally move it about and mess up your spreadsheet, especially if you're saving this in a saved space. Unfortunately, I haven't figured out a way of doing that with all the charts and things yet, because if you protect the worksheet, then that locks down everything, and even if you if I go to the worksheet and show you, it's pretty pointless. Go to review, you can protect the sheet normally, and you can select what you will allow people to do, but unfortunately with slicers, if you're using slicers, you need to have this edit objects box ticked so that people can edit objects. And thanks Excel, thanks Microsoft, because what that allows people to do is not just edit those slicers still and choose the selections, but they can still move the objects and mess about with your settings. So that's but if anyone has any ideas on that, please do comment below. So what I'll do quickly is I'll select hold down Control to select all my other slicers. I'm going to go to my position and layout and disable resizing and moving. I'm going to just minimize the ribbon a minute so that show tabs only, so that I can work with more of my screen here. Next, I want seniority, make it a bit wider so it's consistent with the other categories. And my broad function, so anything that defines the person's role and what they do. It's quite handy to put your slicers conceptually together. And if you want to be really advanced and really impress your bosses, you can use color coding to denote the different kind of themes of your data. So if you're using a few more slicers, positioning things on a page together is one way of making things ergonomically usable and consistent. Another way is the color coding. So you might give, say for example, the demographic slicers a slightly different slicer style. If you were to create it, you might create a dedicated new slicer style. A subtle difference to denote that when people are selecting these things, they're dealing with demographics, whereas if they're dealing with the department and seniority, they're dealing with something about a person's role, and so on. But I think, given the amount of slicers we are, I think their position on a page will do to denote what they're going to change. And then finally, I'll bring the PDR rating and the people's service category in to my area. I'm wondering if I gave this whole dashboard a row too long. If so, what you can do is just hide another row, and then when you go to your print preview, it will, because it's quite long compared to the width, it will just print that a little bit bigger than it did before we deleted that or hid that row. So that's all my slicers in place. I'm just going to control and select these so that I'm disabling and resizing and moving these for when I publish them. So that is inserting the slicers, positioning them, a bit of ergonomics, creating the style. Now we need to connect the slicer to the pivot tables through the report connections. At the moment, you'll notice that we inserted a slicer based on this pivot table. It's not based on any other pivot tables. So, but all our pivot tables are creating all these charts which are derived from those pivot tables. So whenever we select a slicer at the moment, say for example UK, none of the charts are changing except this text box which is looking at the pivot table that we put the slicer based on, and that's like all those slicers are changing this particular pivot table. So what we want to do is get all the slicers changing all the pivot tables, and the way to do that, you select your slicer, go to report connections under slicer settings. You will get a tiny little box like this. That's what she said. However, that's really hard to select lots of things quickly, and unfortunately, thanks again Microsoft and Excel, there's no select all box here, so you have to manually select all the boxes that you want one by one. And an easier way of doing that is just drag the length of this down so that you can select, okay, I want this slicer to refer to all my pivot tables, and see how the naming convention, when you name your pivot tables, instead of pivot table 1, pivot 2, pivot 3 and so on, I know what I'm going to make this slicer work and manipulate. As it happens, I want it for all of them, so I'm just going to do that as quick as possible, which feels incredibly slow. If only Microsoft had thought of a select all box, but it's quite apparent that they don't employ a designer from their design layouts and things like that, because otherwise they'd think of those kind of usability things. But anyway, I digress and moan. So now that location slicer, now I've selected all the pivots that it should refer to, it should slice all those pivots when I select something. So let's go to the UK. Ooh, now here we are in the UK. There's only white people working there. There's this many in each age group. The PDR scores look like this. Their salaries total there. All the charts that we created earlier now refer to the UK. So I'm going to switch that off, and I'm going to do the same with the next slicer. So under the slicer settings, I'm going to show you once more, and then you can do the rest. So again, I'm going to make this longer. That's what she said. I've got that in my head now since watching The Office. I'm going to manually select all these fields once again. So there we go, I've got all my pivot tables selected, so that full or part-time, when I select one or the other of that, it's going to edit all these pivot tables. Click OK. So that one's done. Now, you can go ahead and do the same with the other 8 slicers, because we've got 10 in total. You don't need a slicer for every field, but just pick the ones, if you're not using this follow along, pick the things that your bosses will most likely want to slice and dice the data by, whether that's the kind of high or lower earners, any kind of categorizations. If it's sales data, you might want to slice and dice the top clients or top countries, different country sales and so on. Months. Here's a handy slicer, by the way, if you want to choose a month format. Under insert, instead of a slicer, you might be wondering what this timeline's all about. Now, if you have sales data for the last several years, that will automatically create a selector based on the date field so that a date field must exist within your data in the first place. I've got 2 date fields, the date of birth, which isn't going to be relevant really, or the start date. So I'm going to choose start date and click OK. And what this allows people to do is select, you can move it onto your dashboard should you wish, select the start date fields and the positions between. So let's just select all the people that started within those dates, and that's 8 people. Again, you can apply these settings under the timeline. Choose your report connection, so it connects to all the pivots. Obviously, this is spanning years and years because this is to do with someone's start date. So if you've got far longer term data and you want to allow people to select years rather than months or quarters only, you can use this drop down here. So if I want to span years, for example, again, I can select my start, just dragging these to the extremities. So anyone that started after 2013, that's most of my employees. And then you can clear the filter there. So having a timeline, obviously it's less relevant for someone's start date, but any other date information, that's basically a bespoke date filter, instead of having to categorize things in your data into kind of sales month or sales year based on a sales date. So there's a handy little extra slicer for you that deals specifically with date formats. But coming back to my dashboard, I'm not going to use that date slicer here because it's less relevant. Again, your bosses might want to slice and dice information in a different way, but that's how you get this dashboard completely dynamic, so that when you select things, everything changes. I'm just going to quickly run through now my notes in case there's any other points to cover that I've missed. So yeah, slicers are akin to having a drop-down field on your pivot table. So instead of, if I move this down a bit, drag it down and go to my pivot table settings, field list, sorry. What you can do is, I can have sex as my filter, I can have my department as another filter, the location as another filter. So instead of having to deal with all these and go, okay, male people in this department, and so on and so forth, having to deal with that, slicers are basically an alternative to having these clunky filters on a pivot table if you want to envisage it like that. But those can manipulate lots of different pivot tables and any charts that are then derived from those pivot tables, and we can customize them using the formats and even giving different groups of slicers different format styles to signify the themes. Obviously the last thing to do before you press save and send and get on with the kind of just general tidying up, which I'll show you in the final video in the next video. But obviously for now, go and test your slicers. Make sure you've connected them to the report connection, using the report connections all properly to all the pivots you want, and then let me know in the comments how you've found this so far. If you've used my follow along, I'd appreciate knowing whether or not that's been successful, or if you've used the concepts to create your own dashboard on your own data, how have you got on? And then in the next video I'll tie up all the loose ends and cover all the niceties, including hiding various tabs and the row and column headers, and just making it a lot more user-friendly for your users. So I hope you found that helpful. Check out my blog, ito.blog, or excel@theoffice.com. Both go to the same place. And until next time, take care.